Nadeem, thank you so much for your time. I'm super happy to be here with you today. For the audience, could you please briefly introduce yourself?
So my name is Nadeem, and I'm one of the co-founders of TKS.
That's wonderful. So TKS, what is it exactly?
So we believe at TKS there's not enough smart people in the world working on hard problems. And so we created an institution to train people, specifically young people between the ages of 13 to 17, to solve some of these problems. But where the real secret sauce comes in is what is our hypothesis for this training? And so our goal is to completely disrupt education globally at the end of the day.
That's wonderful. So to be transparent with the audience, I worked for TKS not so long ago. That was I think 2 years ago, for 6 months. Obviously, I had a blast. One of my tasks included being part of the admissions process and reviewing applications. I run through hundreds of applications, a lot of them. And obviously, I remember that we focused primarily on passion, curiosity, and ambition. Why are these 3 points really important to you?
Well, we mentioned TKS exists to train young people to solve important problems in the world. So imagine if you were an athlete, right? Michael Phelps started swimming at 7 years old. Michael Phelps wasn't particularly strong for a 7-year-old or had particularly long arms. He just loved being in the water, and he was willing to put in the work.
Absolutely.
So what is the love being in the water equivalent for people who want to solve important problems, create an exciting future? We think that's curiosity, which is why that's really important. The reason why ambition is really important is there's this quote that we really resonate with at TKS, which is, the limit of global progress is the ambition of the most ambitious. Meaning, if Elon didn't want to go to space, or say no one on Earth wanted to go to space, no one would start a space company. So what is manifested in the world starts from desire. And if there is some semblance of ambition, we're able to tease that out in young people, again, because we want these people to solve some really important problems and create this exciting future. Passion is a little tricky, and what I really don't like is using this term, find your passion, because it almost assumes you're walking around, you see a passion on the floor, and you're like, hey, let me pick it up, put it in my pocket. Whereas we think developing your passion is like developing your best friend. So you might meet someone at first, not even like them, right? Go through some laughs, some cries. 2 years later, you wake up and you're like, I think you're my best friend now. And that's what we think passion is like. It really needs to be developed. And that is the source of intrinsic motivation, because if you want to solve something hard, Elon has a quote where if you need words of inspiration, don't do it. Because inspiration can act as activation energy to get you so far. But when you're facing incredible adversity, when you don't know what to do, when you're about to go bankrupt, what is the thing that allows you to keep moving? And we think it is passion.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. Now, going back to current education models, what do you think about it? From my perspective, I think the society gives a huge importance to academic success, to grades, to recognition. I personally believe that we focus, and students focus more on recognition than actually learning and finding their passion. So what can be improved in education models that we know, not only in Canada, but worldwide? And that's a big one. There you go.
I was going to say, we'll need a few hours to tackle that one.
I can imagine, yeah.
So one of the things that we believe at TKS is that school is built to mitigate risk and not optimize for success. So say you're a young person and you're going through our current system, it is not designed for you to reach your potential, but for you to not fall behind. And I think that's one major opportunity we have to disrupt the education system. The second thing is if you think about 15, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, school might have been the best environment to learn, grow, surround yourself with the right people. Maybe, I'm sure in any system there's a lot of opportunities to improve. But now that we have different tools available, we have the internet available, society has completely changed. The way we get access to information and we communicate has completely changed. I would argue it is very, very suboptimal now. We have 99% of the same information that Elon Musk has access to just by having access to a smartphone. So it is no longer about information. Normally, to go to Stanford or MIT or some of these revered institutions, it was the content. It was the people. But now you can watch a lecture on YouTube and have the same access as everybody else. Companies, a lot of the major tech companies down in Silicon Valley have removed the requirement to even have a university degree, and all Elon Musk companies have removed the requirement to have a high school degree. So before, credentialization was really important, and it's becoming less and less important. And finally, the way that we can evaluate people is on what you're able to accomplish. What have you done? What have you built versus what grade did you get?
Yeah.
And I think it's a function of what are the jobs that are in most demand right now. If you're thinking, about tech, artificial intelligence, blockchain, you can build things now. And so you can show a portfolio, and your portfolio, by the way, it's not graded. It's does it work or does it not work? And that's the thing that really matters versus, a subjective party kind of telling you how good you are at a certain thing.
Absolutely.
I'd say the last thing that I think is a major opportunity for the education system is it's not mastery based. So say, for example, you're in grade 7 and you're learning fractions, and you get a 70% in fractions. What happens? Well, that's a pass. And then you go to grade 8, and now you have to learn algebra. And it's very difficult to believe that you'll master algebra that involves fractions when you only have a 70% understanding of fractions. And so now all of a sudden, we're not setting up our young people for success to actually learn the things that we think are really important, but rather just get by so you can move to the next step. And I think there's a lot of opportunity now to be mastery focused. How can we look at an individual student and figure out what is the best way to fill that knowledge gap and that skills gap, again, as an individual versus kind of going through a system that is often built based out of convenience.
That's wonderful. So basically, how is the Knowledge Society addressing this big challenge? Concretely, what are you doing? What are the sessions? How does it work? Is it a school? Is it an extracurricular program? Yeah.
So the way that I describe TKS is kind of like Olympic level training for nerds, right? And I mean nerds in the best way possible. So it's a 10-month extracurricular program. And again, like if you wanted to be a competitive swimmer, school might be your number 1 priority. And then, your athletics or your swimming is your number 2 priority. And then when you get really good, you might actually design your school around your swimming because you're like, I want to compete in the Olympics. And TKS is very similar. So it's a 10-month program. A student comes in not knowing how to code, let alone know anything about AI, quantum, nanotech, gene editing, stem cells, because we do have an accent on emerging technologies. By the end of year 1, they're completing master's and PhD level projects. And by the end of year 2, they're starting venture-backed companies. They're trying to cure disease. They're speaking on stages in front of tens of thousands of people. And it really is the training methodology for how you get there. And we focus on 4 main areas: knowledge, skills, mindsets, and networks. And we package all of that around an ethos of project-based learning, which is kind of the North Star at the end of the day for how we know that a young person is making progress.
So what does a typical session look like at TKS?
So at TKS, we don't teach you how to code. We're not going to teach you artificial intelligence, but rather give you exposure to what is this concept, why is it important, and how we can use this tool to solve a hard problem in the world. So a session might be, hey, let's go over what is happening on the bleeding edge of AI, because most young people have kind of heard the term, but what is the level of sophistication that we have in the world from some of the best companies? And then let's ask ourselves a hard question that doesn't have an answer yet. How might AI disrupt healthcare in the next 30 years? And these are young people who don't have a lot of experience in healthcare or AI kind of thinking about this question. But now you have an uncapped ability to try and solve the problem. And it is not actually getting to the answer, but the training is the pursuit of the answer. How can you flex these muscles of dealing with ambiguity, of trying to solve a problem with very little information? Because again, if you want to solve a tough problem in the world, you're not going to have those things to begin with. And with new industries, there's no experts. So that's the beauty of it, right? With blockchain, really most people have been working on it for the past, I would say 6, 7, 8 years, which in the grand scheme of things is not a long time. And so, young people are almost kind of starting off at the same level. And so it gives them almost the confidence and permission to be able to tackle these problems versus, if they were to try and become a thought leader in finance, is an example where there's thousands and tens of thousands and people have been working on this for many, many years.
Definitely. Now, according to you, what are the most important skills for students to focus on? Skills and mindsets so they can be happy and successful in whatever it is that they're doing.
So I think there's a couple important skills, and they would fall more in line with the quote-unquote soft skills. But for me, it's not about soft or hard. It's just what you need to be able to have in this day and age if you want to maximize your potential. The first is your adaptability quotient. So training your adaptability quotient. You know, back in the day, kind of the 60s and 70s, we were thinking IQ is a measure of someone's intellectual horsepower. And then as we kind of transitioned into the 90s and early 2000s, it became a service economy. People were working with each other. You were selling. So EQ is very important. And now, because the world is changing, what was true 10 years ago is not even true today, but what was true 100 years ago might still be true 50 years ago. So the world didn't change that much. Whereas again, what was true 5 years ago might be completely different today, and what was true 5 years from now also will be completely different. And so your ability to adapt is very, very important. And young people get that almost instinctually by virtue of living in this ever-changing world. But as soon as you stop, I think you're going to fall behind. Secondly is problem solving and the ability to really figure out how to solve any problem that you face. And this isn't some pie in the sky woohoo thing. There are problem solving methodologies. There are ways to break down problems. There's first principles thinking, right? There's different mental models you can use. And if you think about some of the best and high performance environments in the world, they get trained here. When I was working at McKinsey, that's how I was getting trained. And we don't really train young people to do that. And so that's really important and something we incorporate with TKS. And then the third I would say is figuring out how to deal with ambiguity. Because you know, the reality is that a lot of hard problems don't have an answer at the back of the textbook. And so you might not know what the second, third, or fourth step to take is. And having this skill and a trained attitude to be able to deal with that is very important, because if you don't, you're likely going to shy away from even solving the problem in the first place, right? And you want to give yourself the opportunity to be able to do that. And then I think very clearly working with other people, right, is very, very important, because now you have to be collaborative by default. I think in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, you could be an insanely smart software engineer and not really have to work with people. But now, given the pace of change and given the tools are changing and how we know how to build better companies and provide better experiences, you just need to be able to work with people. And how can we train that in a very high standards, best in class way versus just putting people together and hope that they figure that out? Some mindsets that we think are really important. And I mentioned at TKS, we train knowledge, skills, mindsets, and networks.
Yes.
This is really important because I used to think intellectual horsepower was in one of the top 5 reasons why someone would maximize their potential or have impact on the world. And I realized that it's probably not even in the top 5. I'll give you a couple examples.
Okay,
Imagine you're the smartest person in the world, but you never take any risk. Again, you might just be a really smart software engineer at the back room of a company. And so risk is really important, and your relationship with risk, and kind of having the mindset and understanding that there's a difference between risk and recklessness. And oftentimes when people are talking about risk, they're actually talking about recklessness and vice versa. So if you're jumping out of a plane without a parachute, that is not risky, that is reckless. Why? Because there is no upside.
You need to measure risk. That's what you're saying, basically.
Exactly. And risk is okay. And people can have different appetites of risk, but the upside should proportionately at least reflect the downside. And so oftentimes when, a parent might say, why are you taking an unconventional path and not going to university? Or, why are you starting this company? Whatever the case it is. In their mind, they think it's reckless because they don't understand the upside. But for you, it might be risky, again, which is okay. But part of that is making sure that the downside is proportional to the upside. And that's a mindset that I think is really important for young people to train. Another thing that's in our top 5 is likability, right? If no one likes you, how are you going to be able to hire people to be able to work with you?
Soft skills.
Yeah, and the biggest mindset there, in order to do that, is understanding perspective and to seek out perspective, to actively seek out perspective. What I find is that in North America, where most of my lived experience is we think this is the reality, but it's actually a bubble, right? The rest of the world is a reality. If you even just sum up the amount of people in Canada, US, Western Europe, Japan, Australia, 1.5 billion people, maybe 2 billion people. There's 6 billion people out there that are living a completely different reality that are not living in fully developed economies. And if we want to train young people to solve important problems in the world, or if anybody else out there wants to play a part in this ever-changing global economy, you got to be able to understand different perspectives of not only the people who are sitting next to you, but people who are across the world. And so these are some examples that we think are really important to train. Now the question becomes, how do you actually train these mindsets? And that's a longer conversation, but we're very intentional about doing that at TKS.
That makes a lot of sense. I agree on all of these points. Now, can you please talk about one or two TKS students or even alumni that have been doing quite well in the program and what they're doing right now, and how TKS helped them with their professional and maybe personal life as well?
There are so many examples of TKS students that are doing some pretty incredible things, especially alumni a couple of years out of the program. There's one student who's built a wearable device that can non-invasively measure things like blood glucose and cholesterol levels, again, with not penetrating the skin. And
it's a ring, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah.
It's a ring. And you can get almost as accurate, if not more of an accurate blood glucose reading than a leading freestyle Libra. And this exists right now. And he's 21 years old. And when he started at 16, he didn't even know anything about medical devices or artificial intelligence, right? And now is having a shot on goal to lay the foundations for preventative medicine globally. And this is some 21-year-old kid. Another one of our students just got venture funding to start a nuclear-powered ships company. Who is giving money to a 21-year-old kid to build nuclear-powered ships? But he thinks it's really important for the future of transportation, to improve trade. We're starting to see logistics and shipping prices increase, which is causing major problems for the end consumer, inflation and all that stuff. And he thinks that that's a really important problem that can be solved with this tool. The youngest employee at Neuralink was a TKS student, Ananya. And throughout her journey, it was amazing. She was working in a lab using CRISPR to try and, with her team, cure muscular dystrophy in mouse models. I think we heard a couple months ago, the same lab is on human trials right now, which is amazing. She then got in the blockchain space, realized that there wasn't a good way to share genomics data, so built a way to share genomics data on the blockchain, and that project did really well. Built a talking Pikachu with an AI, and so did all these things, and ended up working on brain-computer interfaces, and she's on her journey working on something a little top secret to do something massively impactful. We have students that are working in the life sciences and biotech. One of our students discovered a correlation between a certain genetic sequence called a repeat expansion and cancer in various sites of your body with 100% correlation. So now this opens up a completely new diagnostic tool, early diagnostic tool for cancer that we haven't really had before. So these are the types of problems that young people at TKS are solving, and there's many, many, many I could talk about, but that's the level of impact we're looking for.
That is absolutely fantastic. And yeah, I personally know them as well. I think the examples that you mentioned, I obviously recognize the people behind it. And most of them are like super, easygoing. Like you mentioned nerds, but like I don't think these people are not talking to each other. Actually, at TKS, what's happening is that you have a community of like-minded people that want to have an impact. And so that brings us to the question, how do you manage to build that community of activators, not activists, activators, scientists, researchers, and people who actually take action? How do you manage to build that kind of community, and why is community important?
So, we've built an institution, this Olympic-level training for young people to solve important problems. In that process, curriculum is not the hardest part. Messaging or marketing is not the hardest part. It really is community. Mm-hmm. Community is the most difficult part to build in any organization, is what I'm learning. And it all starts with being intentional, right? Because community isn't something that's top down. It is a function of how everyone kind of interacts with each other. And so you almost have to play kind of like an orchestrator role to incentivize young people to act and behave in a way that creates the culture that you want to create in the community. And community is essential, especially when young people are doing something new, or when anyone is doing anything new or hard for that matter, because you feel like you're on a shared journey. And so what you have to do to build a very strong community is pretty much be a psychologist or a sociologist, and you have to pay a lot of attention, and you have to iterate, and you have to give feedback and build relationships such that the information that you're getting, you can trust it, right? Because oftentimes if you don't have a strong relationship, then what your customers or users or whatever tell you might not actually be reflective of what's actually happening. And so those are the foundations that need to be in place in order to build great community. But it is a hard problem. It's an art. There's no playbook behind it, but it is one of our top priorities here at TKS, especially since we have students from over 40 plus countries working together, from places like Uzbekistan, Syria, Mexico, coming together. How can we create a space of shared values to be able to build a community and build bridges for people all over the world?
That is absolutely crazy and inspiring. Thank you for sharing. Now, what is TKS Impact? You mentioned it, but in numbers, how would you sum up TKS Impact, and how do you measure it?
When we think about the impact that we're having at TKS, there are some vanity metrics. And I want to be clear, these are the metrics that we don't value as much at TKS. So how many students are getting internships, paid internships at really amazing companies like Neuralink, IBM, Microsoft, all these places. Speaking on stages, news articles, all that stuff. What we really care about is, are there more shots on goal to really tough problems? Again, going back to the main reason why we started TKS, there's not enough smart people in the world working on hard problems. And so you don't need to solve the problem, but are there more people now as a result of TKS as a proportion working on these problems? And that's hard to measure because it's always changing, right? And a student can work on nuclear-powered ships, then work on preventative healthcare, then work on, water desalination. And all of those things are shots on goal, but they're very different things, which is totally fine. Another metric that we can use to actually see tangible impact that's not cute is vehicles that are being spun up and thought leadership that is coming out of young people, again, on these hard problems. So to give you a stat, in the last 2 months, 5 of our alumni have started companies at over a $70 million valuation. Again, still a vanity metric, but people are now willing to give you money and trusting you to allocate that to tackle some of these problems. And it's in areas, like I mentioned, nuclear technology, AI and batteries, blockchain infrastructure. And so it's not maybe the conventional kind of software as a service businesses, but really how can we use emerging technologies to tackle some pretty hairy problems. And so I think that's a really good metric, the amount of patents, peer-reviewed papers. So I still think those are some vanity metrics, but they are some good indicators to kind of show the shots on goal, increased shots on goal that young people are working on.
Thank you so much for all your insights. It's been absolutely fantastic. Now, can you please sum up TKS in 3 words?
Disrupting global education.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any last comments, advices for the audience, anything you'd like to share?
One of my favorite quotes, and a quote that we really propagate at TKS, is the only way to achieve unconventional success is to follow an unconventional path. You can't expect to do the same thing as everyone else and achieve a different result. And it's not just academic success, personal success, success in relationships, success in finance, success in fitness. And so my piece of advice is take ownership over your own personal growth journey and try and take a risk to do something a little bit different, because chances are it'll likely work out in your favor.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, Nadeem. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.